and welcome to our first of 6 programs on the history of Napa. I'm Tony Kilgallin, and my guests today at the top of sunny Mount St. Helena are John Livingston. Good morning, John.
Morning.
And Dave Stork.
Hello.
Good morning, Dave. Dave is the docent and grounds manager. Thanks, Dave. Of Petrified Forest, and John is a geologist by training, PhD in geology. And with these two experts, we're going to start looking at. In our distance, we're going to look at Mount St. Helena and talk about its origins and impact on the valley. And I'll start with you, Dave. How would you define Mount St. Helena?
Okay, you sometimes hear the generalization that it was an extinct volcano, but that's not exactly true. There was a volcano in that general vicinity, but what Mount St. Helena is the uplifted, folded, and eroded remains of the volcanic blast. It's a result of the huge crater that was created after volcanic explosion.
All right, give me that one more time. It sounds like a cooking program. Inverted?
It's okay. Uplifted, folded, and eroded remains of the volcanic blast.
Thank you.
It's now dead. The Sonoma volcanics were like 3 to 6 million years ago. This particular eruption blasted 3.4 million years ago.
3.4 million years ago. All right. John, what are your observations and your
Well, I think to put
this
this thing in context, and since it's about Napa, the fact is that this period of volcanic activity that we had from 6 to 3 million years ago really helped shape the valley, the soils that the vines are growing on, the mining that took place here, the geothermal activity that still remains today that has attracted tourists for 150 years up here. So I think it's relevant that we focus on this geologic period because it has had such an impact on what's happened to people here, even starting from the Indians who found the high-quality obsidian great for arrowheads, and they traded it with coastal Indians. So there's a history here where the geology has impacted the people significantly, and I think that looking out here on this mountainscape here, where this very dominant feature, it's almost 4,000 feet high, this mountain, and it's composed mostly of the volcanic rock, as are most of the mountain ridges here in Napa Valley and in Sonoma. We actually happen to looking over into Napa from Sonoma, I guess, as I understand where the county line is. But,
that's great. Dave, you have 80,000 visitors a year here.
That's a close approximation.
But where we're standing, you could only see this meadow trail on Sundays at 2 o'clock.
We do this walk every Sunday at 2 to the overview of Mount St. Helena, and we also have a nice asphalt deposit right around the bend there. We could go over there too if you're interested. Right. And then we do it by appointment too, and a lot of school groups like to do this, and geology groups, so you can set up appointments here also.
And the park's open from 9
to 6 in the summer, 9 to 7 actually till Labor Day, and then 9 to 6, and then in the winter it's 9 to 5.
All right.
And if you're interested in doing this meadow walk, just get a hold of us and set it up, and we try to do it for you if we can.
Mm-hmm. And this petrified forest, as compared to others in the United States, how would you classify it?
Well, it's actually one of the younger ones. It's 3.4 million years old, which sounds old, but geologically that's relatively young. To give you a comparison, the national petrified forest in Arizona is 205 million years old. So these are geological toddlers, really. Mm-hmm. And this was formed by Sonoma volcanics, where a lot of petrified forests were formed by being under the water that has since eroded away, drained away. And then what happens is the trees are under the water, under the silt, and water carries the minerals into the silt and replaces the tree fibers. In this case, a volcanic explosion sent volcanic ash, engulfed the redwood trees, and we were closer to the ocean at the time. And water from the ocean and the bay and the rains carried the minerals in the ash, mostly silica in this case, down into the trees, the redwood trees, the coastal redwoods, and replaced them with the silica. And there they lay buried for millions of years till erosion finally uncovered the tips of them. And then they were discovered in the late 1800s and then were excavated out in the early 1900s.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
You know, one of the things too is that you were just pointing out, Dave, it's over here we can see some of the youngsters, I guess generations, the young of the coastal redwoods that are still growing over here in this little canyon here. It's a lot drier here, and what we're seeing as we've walked over here and we're going to visit when we go back is a prime redwood sort of a climax forest, judging from the size of the trees. So 3.4 million years ago, we would have been sitting in a very cool, lush redwood forest with trees that were hundreds of feet tall.
That's correct.
And giant trees, as we'll see here. So, and here there's some of their babies still existing.
And the reason they're there is because they sit low in a ravine. They're by a creek, and the moisture from the fog, the morning fog, sits in there. So that's why they survive. Yeah. This location right here, they wouldn't. It's just too hot and dry.
Yeah.
Now you go about 10, 15 miles west, you start seeing them more, like Armstrong Woods, halfway between here and the coast. That's what this area looked like 3.4 million years ago.
Yeah.
John and Dave, let's walk over to the ash fall and have a look at some deposits.
Sounds good.
That's great.
Well, here we are. This is the ash.
The ash fall.
The ash fall.
One of our better components of the ash layering. This is the second part of our meadow walk. After the view of Mount St. Helena and a little discussion there, we come to the ash fall where there's all sorts of interesting little volcanic materials in here. Here's some obsidian and little pieces of petrified wood, and have our little resident geologist here discuss the materials we find in here, I guess.
What do you make of this, John?
Well, I think that just standing back here first, I think that what's significant about this, it gives you some sort of concept of the thickness of these deposits. This was not just a little layer that was scattered around the top of the hills. I mean, this was in places hundreds of feet thick at least. And here you see an exposure which gives you an impression of the thickness, but it's interesting, right along there you can see kind of a shadow that goes down the hill. Right. That's actually a layer within the volcanic rocks, and these are not particularly layered rocks because they kind of all comes down in a big heap, but you can see a layer that goes through there, and so that's actually the strata of the volcanic, so that's a contact between two different eruptions where one actually fell on top of another. And Dave and I were kind of snooping around up there, and this is where you'd expect to find the obsidian, because as the ash falls on a cool surface, a previous flow, whatever it was, this is where the stuff has, it basically doesn't crystallize, it just turns to glass. And so that's why it makes such good arrowheads, because it makes nice sharp edges. But
I'm often asked that, what's obsidian made of, what minerals it's made of. It's not really a mineral, it's like a silica-rich magma that cools too fast to mineralize or crystallize.
Right.
So you get this amorphic rock.
So it's basically glass.
Basically glass, correct.
And this would be traded with the other Indians, with other coastal Indians, you think?
Yeah, well, mostly it was used to make spearheads and arrowheads out of, and usually most Indian big chunks. And these are too small here, but some larger chunks is what they did. And the way I understand it, most Indian tribes had like an artisan who took care of that. There was one guy who was real good at making arrows, spearheads.
How long ago were these Indians using these?
Well, hundreds of years ago to thousands of years ago.
Thousands, yeah.
It was the Wapo Indians in the lower Napa Valley, and up in this, the Pomo Indians were up in this region here. They were both friendly tribes, not hostile at all. These are the artifacts we've seen. In fact, I've found some really interesting spearheads and arrowheads right on this property. Yeah,
do you have some on display down in your museum?
I took what I found down at the Sharpstein Museum down in Calistoga. And some other ones, some other people have found them. They've taken them home. But there are some samples down to Sharpstein. And what I understand of this obsidian, that if it had cooled properly, not real rapidly, that the component is about 35% quartz and 63% feldspar is what it would have been made of, and maybe 2% amorphic rock. But it's not that because it cooled too fast. But people ask me the components, but that's the components it would have been if it cooled slowly.
It's kind of interesting if you looked at the layering here, and it's sitting like this. That means as you go down this way, you're going into older and older rock. Yeah. And if you go up that way, you go younger rock. Well, there was only one redwood forest here, probably, a real pristine, at the onset of this volcanic activity. So you would expect that to be kind of at the bottom of this pile. So stratigraphically, we would be going down into older and older volcanic before we would encounter, the great big trees that we're going to see later on down the hill right here. And this is probably somewhat younger, because I'm not sure whether a huge, redwood forest kind of got reestablished between the eruptions, because it kept going on. Whether you could come back and then have them grow on top of the stuff and be knocked down again. So it's a little bit speculative, but I bet you go down. If you went down this way, you'd find more and more of the trees. Here, you're just finding fragments. There are no trees actually laying up in here.
Sense, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go down and see those petrified trees. Thanks, fellas. Here we are, gentlemen, at the giant, 60 feet long and 6 feet wide. And this has been here for how long, Dave?
3.4 million years.
3.4 million years.
And it was covered by volcanic ash, and you might notice that it's laying away, well, you don't notice now, but this is laying away from the blast of the volcano that we were looking at earlier, where Mount St. Helena now sits. And all the other trees, as you go around the trail, are all laying the same direction, away from the blast of the volcano.
All right.
Just like St. Helens in 1980 up in Washington State.
So the reason you know that is that because the root ball, which you can see at the bottom, so you know that that's the bottom of the tree, the top of the tree went that way, so obviously it was knocked over in this direction. And all these other ones that we see around us here are pointing us, as Dave's observed, in the same direction. So this blast was just bang, all of them went over at once in the same direction. And it's laying on a land surface here, which was actually tilted back towards the direction that the blast came from.
Can you make an analogy to Mount St. Helens?
Oh, absolutely. I think anybody that's seen the TV programs of that, a Spirit Lake, and all those trees that were the trees that were knocked down, I mean, all like matchsticks, laying in the same direction, and it happened in virtually an instant. You know, there they all were. So I think that what we're laying here is a direct analog to that, and I think what it shows is the violence, because these are some of the largest trees, besides being petrified, to have been knocked over like that. Just think of the force that took to just level this forest. So these things were a couple hundred feet high, right?
Correct.
And some of the ring counts that we have on the trees here are 1,600 rings, so 1,600-year-old trees that were just nothing.
Like that.
I do understand that there was not enough volcanic ash at St. Helens, though, that there probably won't be petrified trees millions of years from now. There was more ash here. It's the same concept of blown away from the direction of the blast. But you notice that they're laying kind of some ash around them, but where these were gulfed with hundreds of feet of ash. That's what set up the petrification process.
All right.
So they were all blown away there, but there will not be petrified trees there millions of years from now.
And Dave, if we went directly north from here, we'd go to Lassen, to Shasta, to Crater Lake, and probably right on top of that is Mount St. Helens.
That's correct.
In a direct line.
In fact, I understand Lassen is the southernmost active volcano of that chain. The nearest active volcano to us, by the way, is Mount Lassen. Yeah.
What's the nearest south of us?
I don't know.
No? All right.
No, I don't think there really is.
I don't think there is either.
Not this kind of volcanic
All right.
thing.
I think Lassen's it.
But you can see that if this thing had been exposed, you can see how much it's down underneath the ground here. And it's actually been preserved in recent time by having been buried, because if it had been sitting on a land surface for a long time, it would have been eroded, it would have dropped into a lot of little blocks, and they've gotten smaller and smaller and gone away. So we found this thing, or it's right at the right place at the right time for us to have discovered it, right?
Right, correct. Everything worked out just right. It was near enough to the surface where the natural erosion uncovered the tips. You know.
And we're lucky, Dave, to have you. 25 years. You've been working here off and on since 1977.
Somewhere in there.
All right. You're going to write a book about it?
Maybe.
All right.
Not a bad idea.
All right.
When I retire or slow down a little bit.
I want
Still pretty active right now, though.
I want a signed copy.
Okay.
What would you want visitors to look at the way you know this tree? What would you want them to look at when they're
how
here?
well preserved they are. I mean, these are excellent specimens. You got the bark, the knot, the grains. I mean, these are about the best preserved sort of petrified specimens you're ever going to find. They're
And
so
you have
intact.
cleaned them up a little bit.
Yeah, what we do is we power spray them. We discovered that back in the late 1980s. Put a high power water spray on them, and it blows out the embedded lichens and moss and exposes the detail of the tree a lot better. And it also exposes, you see, they're mostly silica based, but you also see like this orange here. That's iron that was in the volcanic ash too. Some of the trees have iron in them also, along with other materials.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. This has been a treat, and we'll walk out and look at these trees walking or finish our show. Thanks very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, John and I have just driven 5 miles from the Petrified Forest, and here we are at Old Faithful, 5 miles away. And John, you're going to show us the connection between the Petrified Forest and Old Faithful.
Exactly, Tony. And what we're going to see here is going on right now. And what we saw at the last stop was about 3 to 4 million years ago when we had this tremendous of volcanic activity in the area. Well, what's interesting is that this volcanic activity, in a sense, is not quite over. We're not having eruptions, but there's a lot of heat that's left over from that event. And when I say It's left over probably several miles down below us, but there's molten rock down there, and there's a lot of heat here, and that's why Calistoga got formed in the first place, because there were spas, hot springs, mud baths, and some bright guy named Sam Brannan decided he was going to capitalize on this, and he coined the phrase Calistoga, which is sort of the Saratoga Springs of New York and California. And this whole area for over 100 years has been a destination for people who enjoy the thermal springs, the mineral baths, the spas, the massages, and everything else that's going on. But it's very interesting that there is a connection between the fact that this current geothermal activity, links us directly to the explosive history that was here a number of years ago.
All right. And you were saying also that the Indians were here using the hot springs for their own purposes.
Well, they did these medicinal springs and sweat baths and stuff like that. They were drawn naturally to the area too. And just as a brief little history, the heat that's here also is responsible for the minerals. There were many gold and silver mines up around Mount St. Helena there.
Yeah.
And so there was a mining activity which related to the same heat that was left over. And so for a number of years they pulled a lot of gold and silver out of that mine that related to that same period of volcanic activity.
And there were a couple of other points. You say that gold is probably the most, this is the site for most gold in the United States?
Well, recently, oh, here we go.
Here we go. Look,
just
right
by
behind
golly,
us.
it absolutely took place.
Olga.
Here's our proprietress. We were kind of waiting for this
Olga,
event.
here we go.
We didn't see the steam coming, so.
Right on cue comes Olga. Tell us about this, Olga.
Yeah.
I'll hold it for you. Okay.
Oh, well, the geyser erupts on the yearly average about every 14 minutes today. It does vary with the barometric pressure, the moon, the tides, and the earth tectonic stresses. And it usually goes higher in the morning when it's cold because it comes out of the ground 350 degrees hot.
Superheated. Actually, it's called superheated steam.
Right.
It's more than just the regular temperature.
All right.
And it's kind of interesting because just on the other side again of Mount St. Helena is the largest geothermal power installation that was developed in the world. At one time that was doing about 800 megawatts of power generation from almost 15 or 20 different power stations. And what they did were they drilled holes just like an oil or gas well, and they got sufficient steam to come into those wells, ran it up, put them all together and ran it through a turbine to generate the power. The water condensed, they put it back in the ground. So there was a huge development on that side, very similar to this and also superheated. You could, when it comes out of the ground, actually it's invisible. You don't see it. And it's very dangerous too.
But actually those are fumaroles that come out, and this is actually a geyser that you see. There you only see like the steam coming out.
Not eruptions like this, exactly.
Yes.
No. Yeah, that's
So
a good
there's
point.
a little difference.
Fumarole.
Yeah, fumaroles.
Okay.
Fumaroles, right.
Yeah.
Fumarole. This is a wonderful location, and again, you're open 365 days of the year.
Yes, I used to close on holidays, and I had a chain across the gate, and everybody would step over the chain, and I'd say, we're not open, and we're not open, and I thought, well, there are a lot of people today that they don't want to stay home and cook Thanksgiving dinner for their family anymore. They want to go out and eat, and then they want to go someplace to look at something. And very few places in Napa are open on holidays. So I decided I'd be open even holidays, and it's
And you love school children. You were a teacher yourself for many, many years.
Oh yes, I taught school for some 30 years before I came here.
And school tours come through here all the time?
Oh yes, we cater to bus loads of children that come from different schools, and also retirement people that come in buses. And on weekends, you'd think this was a foreign place because there's so many foreigners that come here. We have lots of people from India and China, and Japanese come here. They like to clap when they see the geyser.
And how many languages do you accommodate them in?
We have it in 33 languages in case they
33
can't speak English. Yes. And not recently we had some men from Tibet, and they said, I bet you don't have our language, but we did.
Well, Olga, John and I thank you. You've made our day, and this is the end of show 1 for the History of Napa documentary. And we're so pleased that you were here. You look so colorful, just like the geyser.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga.
Thank you.
Welcome to our second program in the History of Napa documentary. I'm with Andrew Hoxsey at the Napa Wine Company. And Andrew, the Napa Wine Company started in 1877?
It did. It's bonded winery number 9, started in 1877. Our family purchased it in '93 after a very, very long history, but it's again family owned, and we're crushing wines for 65 different wineries.
When you say bonded winery number 9, that's 9 in the state of California?
Yes, if you were to get a bonded winery number today, it would be 7,705, something like that, 4 digits. This is the only winery left that made it through Prohibition that has a single-digit bonded winery number.
All right. Tell me, Andrew, what do we have behind us here? These look unique to me.
They are. They're square red fermenters. Typically, stainless steel tanks are round. They're much cheaper to make. But in the early days, in the 30s and 40s, it was very common to ferment in square fermenters made of concrete. Today, it is not very common to ferment in concrete, so we lined each of these. There's 16 of them, 20,000 gallon tanks. We've lined each of them with stainless steel, and we've been able to chill the insides, the fermentation part, with stainless steel, which we run glycol through. We actually find that we get less tannin and a little better color and fruit flavor because of the surface to volume ratio in a square fermenter versus a round fermenter. So it's been a real kind of experimentation for us, and they've turned out to be very, very valuable tanks, which are basically old technology.
Andrew, you have really 2 facilities. One is custom crushing, and the other is Napa Wine Company, which derives from your 600 acres, various varietals, which are bottled under Napa Wine Company. Can you tell us first of all about the Napa Wine Company, and then we'll go into the custom crushing a little later?
Sure. The family's been growing grapes. Actually, the heritage, I feel like I'm the steward of something that is very, very special. The family farms on a piece of property that was the first vineyard in Napa Valley. George Yount had an 11,000 acre land grant, and unlike most of the other growing regions in California, grapes came basically with the missions. Here there was not a mission, and so it was this George Yount that planted the first grapevine in Napa Valley. We're on his original homestead. The family's been here over 100 years. We started up in the Calistoga area. As you may know, bought our first 32 acres with a $10 gold coin. And now we have this wonderful and long historied facility, Napa Wine Company. But it is such a large facility that we initially opened it up to encourage more entrepreneurs. And these are individuals that either have a winery or want to start a winery to make Napa Valley a much stronger place. We found that we were so good at making wines for other people that at that point in time we started, which was not our intention, but we started to make wines under our own name, Napa Wine Company.
All right, and that was in '93 or '93?
Well, '93 we started the custom crush portion, and in '99 was our first release of the Napa Wine Company.
Now, one of your wines is Maryland Merlot.
Exactly.
Exactly, and another is Palmyra that people will remember from the movie Disclosure.
Exactly.
Demi Moore tries to take a bottle of Palmyra into Seattle to seduce Michael Douglas, and part of the discovery is that she said, "Oh, I just bought it in Seattle," and testimony comes out that you can't get Palmyra in Seattle. You had to have premeditation for seducing Michael Douglas, more than you wanted to know. But tell us more, because this is where you differ from so many wineries. The custom crushing aspect is wonderful. If Brian Miller or Bob Monroe wanted a brand, their own brand, they come to you and they say,
exactly. I have a 5-ton lot of grapes. I want it, it's called a winemaking profile. I want it made in this and this and this fashion. We would do that. Obviously they would be involved at various stages, but at the end of the aging period or after it's bottled, we would give them so many cases of wine that were made out of that 5 tons of grapes, and then the marketing aspect is up to them.
and Brian and Bob would bring their own winemaker with them.
That's our preference.
All right, your preference.
While we have 4 winemakers that we think are very, very talented, even if it's made by committee, over a period of time, those wines they're gonna have a flavor profile that is unique to that committee, so the wines will begin to taste the same.
All right. And you have a waiting list right now of 40 people. Who would like to have their
It's a
wines
tremendous
made here.
success.
Yes.
We think the wine business is always going to be the boutique end of things. It's not the Coca-Cola business. The consumer does not desire that same flavor. The consumer now can have moods. He can change what he wants to drink with every meal, that sort of thing. And so we want a diversity of flavors, flavor profiles coming out of the grapes made here.
Now you're situated almost in the middle of Napa Valley. You have Oakville appellation and Yountville appellation, so you're almost
Yes.
at the belt line.
Yes. I mean, it's very funny, but your last segment, I think you said, was a little further north.
Yes.
And from my perspective, that's where red wine was actually born. I said that my great-grandfather started up in Calistoga. But in my memory, in the early days of us growing grapes in the Yountville area, it was always white fruit, that your earlier ripening fruit. Technology has changed to the point where this red migration is happening, where we have less red leaf, a variety of issues where they've cleaned up. The vines are more efficient at converting sunlight basically to sugar. And so in the early days, because it's warmer up north, all your red fruit came from Calistoga. Now Oakville is as hot as it gets for Cabernet Sauvignon. Even Merlot down in Carneros. I feel that there was very little fruit grown in Carneros in the 60s and 70s. Well, that's technology that's changed that. And so at this point in time, when I was growing up, we had basically 2/3 in white early fruit. Now it's over 2/3 in red later ripening fruit.
You have a huge facility, and our viewers won't get the whole gist of it, but your acreage is how big?
A little over 600 acres.
600 acres.
And all of it's organically certified. We feel that grapes is a crop that you can be very, very sensitive to the environment and sustainable. Basically not use herbicides and
you're partial
pesticides.
to recycling, you were telling me, other products which you would top the soil in between harvests?
Exactly. To us, what being organic basically means is that we are going to return in the form of organic matter whatever we get off the soil. If we get a 4-ton crop, we're going to make compost and put it on at 4 tons per acre rate. And what that basically does is allows not only organic matter, but the microbial activity to properly cycle that matter. I feel that there are certain nutrients in the soil that are always there, but are locked up in an unavailable form. If you have the right microbial activity, those bugs, aerobic bacteria, mycorrhizal fungi, are going to actively mine those nutrients and make it available to the plant. So
really,
you'll get a situation where you never have to add fertilizers, basically.
Really, then you're recharging the soil 24,
Annually.
365.
Yes, exactly.
Recharging it.
Exactly.
Which is a
we
different
also
aspect of
we
recycling.
also grow a cover crop of 5 different things before we mow that cover crop down, and that can easily be another 3 or 4 tons. So you could almost say we're returning twice what we're taking off. But the one of the things that we've found is unique about cover crop is we'll plant 5 different things. We'll go out into the soil and read our soils like a book. If you take a stab, a soil sample here or there, you might miss where the cutoff is. But when you're actually looking at what grows out of your cover crop, you know exactly where it is. If only your grasses grow, you're too high in nitrogen. If your mustard crop doesn't grow properly, you've got too much of a plow pan down there because it has a deep taproot. And if it hits a plow pan and can't get through the taproot, it's not going to be as vigorous as it would. And so what grows out of that cover crop tells you a lot about what's going on underneath.
All right, we're in the middle of some activity. We're going to move to the barrel room now, Andrew. Andrew, I noticed these barrels here have no names on them, but what I seem to be approaching is Lark Mead. Is this Lark Mead's winery?
It is. We have a concept here at Napa Wine Company of what they call alternating proprietorship. And you'll notice these cages, if you will, behind us. The concept is Lark Mead brings their grapes in and dumps it into our hopper and goes through our crusher stemmer to a tank. We alternate the ownership of that crusher stemmer and hopper to them. And everything that the grape/wine touches as it works through the facility is alternated to the owner of the grapes, Lark Mead. What that enables them to do is have their own bonded winery number. They basically would qualify for an estate bottled program. It's been very, very effective for us in our quest to get small wineries. And you can see these are fairly small little cages, but it's a unique set of rules within the TTB, the Alcohol Trade
How
Tax
many
Bureau.
cases would they do?
Oh, it'd be 1,000 cases or so.
1,000
Yeah,
cases.
yeah.
How do they book you in the fall? How do they know when their grapes are going to be ready?
Well, they have their own. We have on file their winemaking profile. They have their own winemaker. Hopefully, their winemaker will make the decisions. But if we have to make a decision in-house, we have a profile that we can go to and said, well, if the winemaker was here, our best guess as to what they would want done would be this. But then over and above that, their winemaker certainly would call pick date and is the one that is out in their fields, those sorts of things. So typically when you come to us for services, we're going to say, well, how big of a lot do you want, or number of lots? Who is your winemaker and where are your barrels, so that we can put them in the facility like this. We basically are just lending up the more high-tech instruments. We like to say that we're trying to separate the industrial and the art side of the winemaking business. And we feel that the barrel storage is more the art side. You can stipulate different kinds of toast and different woods from different forests, those sorts of things.
So your time management has to be extremely acute when you're getting into the harvest time. You have to know day by day, hour by hour,
It is.
who's doing what.
It is. We like to say that it's a level playing field around here. While we own the facility and have our own label, we consider ourselves a customer of ourselves, and we get no more preferential treatment than anybody else that is making wine here. So basically during harvest, it's a first come, first serve. Typically it's about a 2-day, you need to call 2 days before you think you're going to pick, that sort of thing.
So you've been a steward, I love your phrase, stewardship of the soil and saving the soil, stewarding the soil ever since 1877. Not you in particular, you look too young for that. But this has been an ongoing process that you hope will obviously go beyond your lifetime.
Well, that's true. I mean, people like to talk about the term sustainable, and I always like to point out that to be truly sustainable, to provide good jobs for the people in your community and kind of a pollution-free community, you also have to pay your bills. And so we need to be in business this time next year. We think that a smaller or a larger number of smaller businesses greatly lends to having this health of the community.
All right. Well, let's go to the bottle, Andrew. Let's walk along to the bottle. So this is the light at the end of the tunnel. This is the famous tasting room.
It is. We call this the cellar door at Napa Wine Company.
The cellar door.
Yes, and the concept again here is that it's a level playing field. It's not Napa Wine Company's tasting room. It's Napa Wine Company plus 4 different producers that we make the wine inside the walls of
Has
Napa
it
Wine
always
Company.
been 24? Is it a
No,
fluctuating number?
that's changed given regulations and that sort of thing. Today there's 25 that are legal, and as you can see with the little black stripes on the counter here, we have to have 18 inches for each bonded winery.
18 inches for each bonded winery. All right, of counter space. All right.
See those stripes?
So I'm looking at Palmyre and Lorraine and Pavie, and
So the concept is this is the first place that you can buy the wines that come out of this facility.
all right. Now, do people have to make an appointment to come through here?
It is by appointment. We prefer people to call. We're certainly not going to turn anybody away, but we'd sure appreciate a call.
All right.
We've often thought about putting a payphone out in the parking lot.
Early reservation. I did this in Italy at Verrazzano. Verrazzano goes back 500 years, and she said it's by appointment only. And I said, damn, I've missed it. She said, well, this is the morning. How about making an appointment for the afternoon? This is Verrazzano who created the Verrazzano streets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, this is wonderful, Andrew. I'm so, my mouth is getting very dry at this point.
Absolutely.
Is there some way
We should be
we've been
able
working
to-
very hard.
To get a little wine here.
All right. Is Marilyn serving? No, Marilyn's not serving today. Josh is serving today. A Sauvignon Blanc,
2002 Sauvignon Blanc.
2002 Sauvignon Blanc.
You know, there are, we think that we are continuing the effort of generations of the past, and I know there's speculation about what made Napa Valley what it is today, and you know, I think it's a real combination of issues, but in the 60s, you probably remember that there were all sorts of agriculture here. There was dairy and there were prunes and just a variety of things. In the late 60s, we came up with this ag preserve, 1968 to be exact, where you could not subdivide your property for houses, that sort of thing. People had seen what had gone on in the San Jose area. Once that ag preserve went in, there were a number of large companies. Nestle's bought Behringer, and Reynolds bought actually Inglenook, that sort of thing. They sent a tremendous amount of capital to a very small agricultural community. And with that capital, you got a variety of very talented people that came here. And so it's a blend between the heritage that was here, the capital that larger multinational companies sent to jumpstart, if you will, and then with that capital came talented people who are the entrepreneurs that we're trying
All
to
around.
foster today.
And we should-
basically new blood in this environment. So.
We should mention that your grandfather played a prominent role in the ag
He was very
preserve.
proud of the Ag
Yeah.
Preserve issue. He was on the Planning Commission and was pretty adamant. I don't think his crystal ball was as good that he knew it was going to be grapes, but there were some form of agriculture that would pay the property taxes and keep the ground into farming. So.
I see a Napan in the room who knew Andy Palissa, and he's probably thirsty at this point. Howard Dickenson, would you like to come over and have a glass of wine? You made your appointment. Here you are. What do you like about this place, Howard?
The variety of wines is unbelievable, and they're all local, and you have some of the greatest winemakers come in to make their to make their own wines here, and so it's a great variety.
As I recall, you were on the bottling line for Yountville a few years ago.
And we started out making homemade wines. That's right.
1978, 79. One of your specialties was Petit Syrah. as I
Petit
recall.
Syrah, and it's still very drinkable.
It's been drunk as well as in the last month or so. You're 79.
That's right.
Andrew, thank you so much for today. We're going to get to the bottle in a minute. Welcome again to our History of Napa documentary, a six-pack on Napa, a new history of Napa, and I'm pleased today to be at the Napa Valley Museum with the Executive Director, Eric Nelson. Eric, good to meet you.
It's great to be here.
And we're outside, and we're going to be talking about the Napa Valley Museum, which is in an expanding mode, but we'll also talk about its past and present and hopes for the future. And Eric, I'm going to lead off with you. When was the museum created?
Now, the museum actually was established in 1972 up in St. Helena. A group of concerned citizens got together to preserve an old high school building, Vintage Hall, which was being threatened with demolition. So they formed a nonprofit, got together, rallied the troops, saved the building. Should we wait for the sound, or?
Sound is good.
Good.
We're never going to lose it.
Excellent. Anyway, step back. The group got together, saved the building. The building hadn't been retrofit, so it wasn't safe for school children to go in. So the schools allowed the museum to move into a part of that, or allowed this group to use a part of that building as a museum. The rest of it was used as administrative offices. So the museum functioned as a museum in that location from about 72 until we moved to this new location in 1998.
1998. I should say to our audience that we're on the site of the Veterans Home in Napa, or Yountville, I should say, which was founded almost a century before that. We're talking about 1869, right after the Civil War, I think.
Right.
So this is a unique perspective for you as a museum. You've got museum pieces walking around every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're just tremendous historical resources that surround us. And of course, the Veteran Home has its own small museum with fabulous artifacts, not specific to the Napa Valley, but specific to the residents here. And again, things that date back to the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, all the way up through, and it's really marvelous to be surrounded by such history.
This is a work in progress. This is phase one of a series of phases that the museum will have in the future. Is there something current for on the boards in the next 5 years?
You know, the museum has just completed a strategic plan looking forward. Originally, back in the early 90s, the folks that had been involved with the museum then, John Livingston and Frank Stout and others, had envisioned a museum that would be approximately 45,000 square feet, permanent galleries that really interpreted the region's history, its environment, and allowed for wonderful exhibitions of contemporary as well as historical art. And this has been the vision moving forward ever since that time. A capital fundraise was launched in the mid-90s. Enough money was raised to build the first phase of that 45,000 square foot facility, which is the 10,000 square feet we're housed in currently.
Right. Yeah.
We've just kind of come to consensus with the board and with the staff and with a few lead prospective donors to move forward with the next step. And instead of trying to complete it in small chunks, the goal is to finish with another 35,000 square feet that will allow us to really fulfill those dreams of having this permanent exhibition, rotating exhibitions, classroom spaces to help educate the children, also to provide programs, again, that relate to the history, the art, and the environment of the Napa Valley.
Because the Napa Valley didn't begin with George Yount, and on your right here we have some artifacts that preceded him by maybe a couple of thousand years. Have they been carbon dated? Could you hold a couple up?
Yes, of course. So we just actually acquired a significant collection of Native American lithics from here in the valley with the help of one of the museum's good friends, Bill Harlan from up in Meadowood. This is a point, probably a knife blade that was used about 1,500 years ago here in the valley. It was found actually in a vineyard outside of St. Helena. And donated here to the museum, but it's just an exquisite piece. And
this is when we had grizzlies up here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the craftsmanship of the Native Americans' work from that period is just exquisite. Also brought out a bird point, which I think is one of the finest small pieces I've seen. And again, you can just see the amazing craftsmanship here. And it's a little bit larger than some bird points, but again, just exquisite in every detail.
Now, when you say a bird point, what do you mean by that?
Well, this would be used on the end of an arrow for hunting large birds.
I see, for large birds, okay.
This is another very interesting and significant piece, hard to find, very rare. This is a pipe that was bored out by hand. It was all done by hand. It has a wonderful patina hand polish. It was used significantly. And again, this was found off of Pope Street.
Is it serpentine?
It is, exactly.
It is?
Black serpentine, wonderful
yeah.
streaks,
Yeah.
fairly local stone. So again, a beautiful piece, obviously well used and well cherished. So again, I know we work very closely with the Susquehanna Council and other Native American organizations, and work closely with the Native American Graves Protection Act to make sure that all of the artifacts and objects that we end up adding to our collection meet with all legal, moral, and ethical codes. So these are a few of the pieces that have been sanctioned for us to have, and these are the kinds of pieces that we're going to be incorporating into the expanded facility.
I see.
One of the key pieces of the expansion as we envision it is going to be a 10,000 square foot gallery that really looks at the cultural history as well as the environmental history of the Napa Valley. So it'll be an opportunity for school kids, tourists, locals to come in and really get a feel for what this valley was like from the time the valley sunk and was created geologically to the first people, the Native Americans, as the early Mexican, Spanish settlers came in, followed by the Americans from the east, followed by the Chinese, followed by the Germans, followed by the line goes on until we come to today. So it'll be a wonderful opportunity to look at how the valley has developed to become what it is, and hopefully where it will be. Again, one of the main goals of the museum is really to enhance the quality of life here in the valley, and one of the ways we try to do that is to develop a great appreciation of the people that are here for the cultural resources, the historic resources, the artistic resources, the natural resources. We feel strongly that once people have developed an understanding, they'll develop an appreciation. And with that appreciation, a true stewardship and a true understanding of how best to care for those resources. And that we feel will be helped dramatically by the expansion of the museum and the installation of this permanent exhibition.
The Goodman Library and the Napa County Historical Society in downtown Napa on First Street, the building was laid in 1900, and that has been a library and a resource center as well as a museum. It's undergoing a retrofit at this time, and you're kind enough to help them with storings. Tell us what you're going to store for them, because it looks, if you were looking ahead in the future, you would say your tie-in with that institution is greater than I think any other institution in the valley. Your purposes are similar.
Correct.
And you're probably taking over from, or could be taking over from, an institution that needs help at this time.
Well, again, we really see a big part of our function is to help with the stewardship of these resources, and certainly the Historical Society is a repository and has become the caretaker of some very significant historical resources for this county. And we certainly want to do, and we are doing everything that we can to ensure the preservation, the safekeeping of those objects. Working very closely with the Historical Society Board and their volunteers to make sure during this retrofit of the Goodman Library that the objects of significance are here. We have a climate-controlled collections facility that the pieces are being stored in, and certainly we see ourselves as being extremely helpful, and if not, eventually perhaps a final repository for a lot of these objects where they can be cared for professionally. In turn for that, the museum has agreed to help the Historical Society with exhibitions at the Goodman Library, as well as the cataloging and safekeeping of those objects, and hopefully advice as well with the archival collection that they have. The Historical Society has probably the premier collection of documents and photographs that chronicle the history of the valley, and we as a museum care deeply that that is preserved and available for scholars and researchers.
When you come to Napa, we want you to obviously see Napa Valley Museum, but also the Goodman Library, which is hidden in a similar way that the Napa Valley Museum is hidden. People coming into Yountville, not going to the Veterans Home, don't know that this is a hidden treasure here. But some of the volunteers at the Goodman have been there for 50 years. They show it religiously for 4 hours. And it's You used the word stewardship, and in a previous show that Brian and I did, we were hosted by Andrew Hoxsey of the Napa Wine Company, and his job, the theme of his talk was stewardship of the soil. Mm-hmm. So between stewardship of the soil and stewardship of the artifacts which have come out of the soil, it's a wonderful continuum. Tell us about these two works of art in front of us here.
Right, so along with the cultural artifacts that really document the way people live,
we should go to this one first,
yeah.
I think. Yeah, let's go to
Wonderful.
this.
We have two other major focuses. One is on the environment, and we talked a little bit about that, but this has some relationship to it. A lot of people aren't aware that up valley, there were extensive quicksilver mines, and of course Silverado Squatters by Robert Louis Stevenson was all about Robert Louis Stevenson's summer he spent in an abandoned
1880,
mine.
yep.
Exactly. Well, this happens to be a lantern from one of those quicksilver mines that was discovered and donated to the museum. And again, talking about how the natural environment has influenced the human history and human culture is just remarkable, but this is just one example of that interesting history that's pretty much past.
But if either of us, or not you, but if I saw it in a junk shop, I wouldn't know what it was and couldn't be able to understand the background.
Right, of course. And again, that's one of the things that museums are so good at, taking an object that you may not understand or see the significance of, and really interpreting that, being able to explain exactly what it was used for, when it was done. Yeah. This was created back in about 1910, 1915, and again used extensively towards the end of that run.
All right, because quicksilver panned out.
Exactly. But you know, as you know, the gold mining actually continued up valley until just recently with the closure of the Homestake mine. So mining is not, when you think of Napa Valley, you generally don't think about mining, but actually it's an important and significant piece of the county's history.
And this picture, Eric.
This is another jewel. This is a recent addition to the museum's collection. This came in last year. It's a lithograph that the museum acquired. It's of the Napa Valley in 1851.
Yeah.
So you can see that even from the earliest times, you know, in the midst of the gold rush, artists were coming up and documenting what the valley looked like.
You know, Napa had 50 homes at this time, 50 homes. Bishop Alemany was here in '49 and said 50 homes. Right. So this is up valley from Napa.
Exactly. You can see looking down over the valley, a small grouping, more likely than not Native Americans, with a small fire going. So again, you know, art that chronicles the heritage, the history of the valley is important, but also contemporary art is another area that we're collecting. We had a retrospective of Earl Thollander's work, I think probably the premier artist here in Napa Valley for years and years, the retrospective that we had was just prior to and following his passing, which was a couple of years ago. But we've decided to continue collecting artwork, Earl's artwork, as well as other significant local artwork. So we're working with the Thollander family and other collectors to really build that collection. This is one of his more contemporary pieces, but we have work in the collection that goes back to the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah.
So it's
magnificent man, magnificent artist, and the last work he did was an update of the Silverado Squatters, and that was his last work. This is, and you have a publication?
Yes, of course. And again, it's kind of interesting because the cover art on this year's annual publication is a piece that was done in 1886 by Sophie Ahlstrom Mitchell, who immigrated to the Napa Valley early on. Her family had owned the resort up at White Sulphur Springs, and she had studied art with some of the early founders of the Bohemian Club. She had married the first Presbyterian minister of the minister of the First Presbyterian Church in St. Helena, and continued to paint these wonderful still lifes of flowers from the Napa Valley. Our annual publication is obviously produced once a year, and we make sure that we cover the topics that the museum focuses on. That's local art, local history, and local environment. This issue has articles on the agricultural preservation movement that really was launched in the early 70s. We focus on a contemporary artist as well as a historical artist, and there are stories about different historical figures as well. So it's a great publication, one of the great benefits of membership. You can find out more information about the museum as well on our website, which is www.napavalleymuseum.org. It has a listing of all of our upcoming exhibitions, special programs. We do a series of programs every Saturday afternoon. Everything for storytelling for the kids to learning how to paint. All those are listed. Special event fundraisers are listed as well. So it's a great way to find out a little bit about the museum and what's going on.
And you're open every day except Tuesdays.
Correct.
Tuesdays.
Close Tuesday, and actually Mondays are a free day. So
Yeah.
members of the community, actually visitors as well, are invited to come up on Monday and get a free taste of the museum.
And when you mentioned Bodega and Napa, people who are not in California don't realize how close we are to the Pacific Ocean, but the Indians who were here would trade with the coastal Indians, and so you would find shells here in Napa, and
Correct.
people would say, wait a minute, how do you get shells in Napa? Well, Indians then would traverse once a year, and they would barter what they found here, maybe glass, obsidian, for shells.
Exactly. There's
And
wonderful trade routes that have been established
Yeah.
that are documented. And in the basketry you find abalone everywhere, and on the coast you find wonderful obsidian from Napa. So great exchanges culturally. And I think Napa, Sonoma, and Marin have ethnologically very, very different language bases.
Yes.
In fact, if you talk to people who study First Peoples languages, you find out that the dialects that the Pomo were speaking in northern Marin County was as much similar to what the Wapo were speaking here in Napa as Chinese is to English. And then if you add the Coast Miwok from Marin County, you get a third language that's just as different as those three. But yet they had just an amazingly similar culture, similar basket weaving, similar use of obsidian, seashells, and all brought together through the economy of trade. So very interesting.
is there a national website for museums so that somebody coming from the East Coast would say, we're going to California, we want to see the Getty, where you were just on it, I should mention, as being a visiting scholar.
Thank you.
Is there a website that you would say, all right, I want to do museums in California, and you are listed there?
Right, right. There are a few that I would direct people to. The California Association of Museums has a wonderful website that lists museums locally or within the state.
Okay.
Also, the Western Museum Conference has a great website as well with different museums listed by subject matter as well as locale. And again, probably the largest and most comprehensive organization that helps out with museums is the American Association of Museums in Washington, D.C., and they have extensive websites that can pretty much put you in a museum in any community throughout the country. So those are three great places to start if you're interested in museums.
Brian is going to go inside and take a look at the inside of the museum, and our viewers will be able to see just all the glories that are in Napa. In the valley, I remember Geographic doing a book on the valleys of America, and people said, well, what's the importance of this? Well, they said valleys collect things. Valleys collect things, and whether you're in Shenandoah or whether you're here, there's something about a valley. And this happens to be one of the most perfect in the country, but we are so blessed with the heritage that goes back so far.
Yes, it makes my job a true joy.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, I'll put a plug in for the museum store because we have wonderful publications like this one that I believe you had something to do with.
I had something to do with this, yeah.
Not
yeah,
only
but
can
not
you,
the photography.
not-
That's Nancy Kirby's work, but it is a wonderful book that a publisher said, we like to do cities of America, and they came to a valley. They did a valley. We're the only valley they did, but it has a Henri Rousseau front page look
Fabulous.
at it that just fixates
Yeah,
there.
it's a beautiful publication,
Yeah.
and we do in our store try to focus on publications and other objects that relate to the
Yeah.
historical and cultural significance of the valley. So if you're coming, don't forget to stop at the
So
store.
people are coming to Napa not just for the wine. It's not just for a $2 chuck. They're coming
Right.
for a lot of different things, and they're coming to Napa and finding that there's more here than just what you can put in a glass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there certainly is a bit of a cultural revival going on here in the valley with Copia and the Opera House. Lincoln Theater across the way is just being retrofit, and this is really becoming a first-class community, not only for the wine and the food, but also for the cultural amenities as well. And it's a great place to be.
150 years ago, in 1854, George Yunt was sending his wine. He's killing grizzlies one day and sending his wine down to San Francisco. So we're 150 years away from that. And Eric, I thank you so much for introducing us to the Napa Valley Museum.
Thanks for being here.
Welcome to the Carneros area, the southern part of Napa County. back in 1859, coming upriver from San Francisco were George Yount, Judge Stanley, and the author and statesman Richard Henry Dana, 1859, and they're talking about how fertile San Pablo Bay area was. That's 1859, right after the Spanish. And 100 years later, probably almost 100 years later, the gentleman on my left, Rene di Rosa, saw the same opportunities in the Carneros area and said, I think we've got something here. And tell us how you came to the Carneros.
Well, I came in a Pierce Arrow. No, I came because I was working on one of the 4 dailies as a reporter in San Francisco, and I needed to get away. And my wife at the time was French, and she was going back to France all the time, it seemed, and I was alone, and I was looking for some place to come to. So I came north from San Francisco to explore. And wonderfully enough, the Carneros area, and this in particular, this piece of land, reminded me very much of the France that we had just been to, the olive groves, and some of there wasn't many vineyards here now. As a matter of fact, there was just about a couple of 100 acres of vineyards in all of Carneros. But I guess it was the link between France and Carneros that told me that I would very, very much like to settle here someday.
Mm-hmm. Are you a winemaker?
No, but I'm a wine drinker. I began drinking wine when I was a kid because my father, the only way he'd get me to drink a glass of water was to put a tablespoon of red wine in it, and then it looked something good.
We'll leave you for a second. I'm going to turn to a real winemaker, and this is Dick Ward, co-founder of Saintsbury Wine. And Dick, how did you come to Carneros?
Well,
Pierce Arrow?
Not in a Pierce Arrow, probably in an old Volvo station wagon, but my business partner and I, David Graves, met at UC Davis, where we were studying enology and viticulture in graduate school there. And we saw Pinot Noir as a great opportunity to, if we were successful, become a big fish in a small pond. So in 1981, we started Saintsbury, and of course looked to Carneros as the source of great Pinot Noir fruit in order to make great Pinot Noir wine, which we were hopefully destined to make. And we came down here and on Cuttings Wharf Road, bought some Pinot Noir grapes in 1981 from Zach Berkowitz.
Did you see a French connection when you first came the way Rene did? Did you see a connection with any particular part of France?
Well, you know, Carneros doesn't look quite like Burgundy, but it does have one thing that's in common, which is clay soils. Of course, in Burgundy they tend to be calcareous clay soils, but in Carneros they tend to be acidic ones. But those clay soils are not very fertile, and for Pinot Noir, which is a notoriously difficult grape to grow, you want soils that don't have much fertility so that the grapes struggle a bit and you can get the maximum intensity and quality out of them without them trying to strut their stuff too much and grow too many grapes on each vine.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the wine drinker. Rene, you came late 50s, you're Pierce Arrow, and what did you do? You bought?
No, I looked around. I looked here and I looked there, and but I didn't see that the piece of land that I could afford, and that had some emotional appeal for me. And the emotion, I guess, had as much to, certainly it had more to do than any, I wasn't thinking about planting a vineyard then. I didn't, I just thought I would find some way to make out. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew that I could grow something. At the time, they were, or this ranch was a cattle ranch, and I thought, well, if they can have cattle here, why can't I? And so I was really thinking about cattle.
How many acres are we talking?
I think it ended up being about 450, 500 acres.
Okay. Dick, you are so close to Rene here.
3/4 of a mile in that direction.
And you saw something that Rene saw, the spirit of place or something also, but particularly you didn't see cattle, you saw this is a great spot to start Pinot Noir.
Well, it had a history of Pinot Noir planting when we got there in '81. Of course, the history was Rene di Rosa planting Winery Lake Vineyard in '63, and Andrei Chelichev from Beaulieu Vineyard planting BV5 in '62. And of course, it goes back further than that to the first modern plantings, which were on the Stanley Ranch, named after Judge Stanley, who owned it. And that was vineyards planted in the 50s by Louis Martini. So, in fact, they were doing a viticultural trial for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir clones. People didn't really know what clones were back then very much, but they did these trials with the Wente family and with UC Davis in the late 50s. And so when you hear about Wente clones of Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, because the Wentes had a nursery and they were propagating these, they were first identified and planted over on the Stanley Ranch in Carneros.
Okay. Rene, you then Lake Winery is 1963.
Winery Lake.
Winery Lake, 1963, and you were growing what varietals? Were you growing Pinot Noir?
Yeah, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and a little Merlot, but Gerwitz, Tramina, and Riesling were the other ones. That
And your winemaker was?
We didn't have a winemaker. We never. We had the building down there is a 150-year-old winery, but I eventually ended up selling grapes to about 50 different wineries, but I never made grape
You just
grape
needed
juice.
a traveling doctor that came in and said, you need this and this, and
Exactly, and sometime I would go to Davis to try and educate myself, but when I went there, I was really grew tired of all of the talk about viticulture, and I wandered into the art department there. And the art department was so damn strong that it won me away eventually.
Dick, the Carneros Alliance has grown out of what two of you saw in the early days, and now what are we talking about encompassing under the Carneros Alliance? How many acres and wineries?
Well, gee, there's got to be several dozen wineries and 50 or more growers that encompasses all of Carneros on both the Napa County side and the Sonoma County side, because it is an appellation that is stretching across the county lines. And they've been active for the last dozen or so years promoting the Carneros appellation and the wines made here.
And these are the first wineries that you see coming from San Francisco, the first wineries entering.
Yeah, whether you come up over the Golden Gate Bridge through Sonoma County or whether you come up over the Bay Bridge into Napa County, the first wineries that you come to in both of them are Carneros wineries, and they specialize in Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And a little bit Merlot, and now some Syrah, and
we're going all the way back to Buena Vista and the middle of the 19th century.
Well, Rene was talking about there only being a few hundred acres of vines here when he came here, in the early 60s. But back in the 19th century, there were many, many hundreds of acres of vines in Carneros. And we had the dubious honor of having, phylloxera found in Carneros here first, which was the root louse that pretty much devastated all of the vineyards in California and all the vineyards in Europe too. So we had phylloxera found here, and in fact, I think on this property, Professor Hussman came out from Missouri and did rootstock research to try to develop new rootstocks that, using Native American vines as the roots with the European vines as the upper fruiting part, so that they would be actually resistant and immune to the attack of phylloxera.
Right, very important. Rene, you loved wine drinking, but you also loved art, and I think you told me once that you realized that you'd never be as good an artist as you would be a collector. And so you started collecting, knowing that you couldn't do one thing, you started doing something else. And what have you accumulated to date?
Well, I've accumulated about 2,000 works largely by Bay Area artists, which is what I am concentrating on. Because every major city has a major museum with major financial supporters wanting to be national and international. Consequently, regional artists are put down in the cellar in many cases, and I've had that happen. I loan some works of regional artists thinking that they're going to be given a good exposure, and instead they ain't got it. So it was, I guess, a challenge for me to take up the cause of the regional artist. And that's what I've been doing. And the 2,000 works are by artists who are 95% of the region.
And our viewers will find out through the show that your art is internal, external, it's inside, it's outside, it's art and nature, and everywhere you look, as right behind us, you can see art in situ wherever you find it. Art is wherever you find it.
True. And you find it in your heart too, and in your skull, and it can cause you to smile. It can also cause you to weep. And so
when visitors come by, they see the sheep out front, they see the black sheep. Tell us about that, because that's the first time people come, the first thing people see as they enter your preserve.
Well, Carneros and was translated from Spanish. It's for sheep, and my wife made those sheep, and the black one was always stolen just because it was the odd one, and so now they're all metal, and they're concreted into the ground, and there were a lot of sheep around here when I came here.
But on the back of the black one it says Rene. Is that you? Did Veronica realize that you were the black sheep? Not at all. Dick, tell us a little bit more about the special times of the year that visitors from all over the country can come to. You have Carneros days, and if they're coming, of course they can make appointments anytime, but how would visitors say, we want to start with a Carneros and then move up valley?
Well, there are Carneros days, I think, in the springtime, in April, and also in the late fall. So because Carneros is the gateway to Napa and Sonoma Valleys, it's a great opportunity to stop in Carneros first. We're sitting at the end of the Mayacamas mountain range as they turn into the rolling hills of Carneros. This spot used to be almost underwater in the last ice age, which was about 75,000 years ago. And the Pacific Ocean and the bay stretched up as far as Yountville. Because of that, We have the kinds of soils that are so conducive to growing the great wines, from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir that we have. It's ground that derives from marine sedimentary mud, clays, acidic clay loams on these gently rolling hills, which are not very well forested, as you can see, because it's always breezy. And as the sun warms up Napa or Sonoma valleys, that warm air starts to rise and it starts sucking this cool air off the Pacific Ocean, because the Pacific is a very cool ocean. So we have, the perfect climate, not very fertile soils, cool summer days where a typical maximum temperature might be 82 or 83 degrees. Whereas if you go 10 miles farther up into Yountville or Oakville, it would be 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on that same summer day. So it has a profound effect when you look at that over every day of the growing season. And that's why we grow Pinot Noir down here, and they grow Cabernet or Merlot or Zinfandel 10 miles farther north up the valley.
If you're the average driver, though, driving north, Saintsbury would be hard to find. How would you find it? Is there a website people could look to for
Certainly.
all of the Carneros, and particularly you?
We have a website. It's Saintsbury.com, and excuse me. We are open by appointment only, but if you are heading up Highway 29 before you get to Napa, you turn left on Highway 121 and enter Carneros. And if you turn down either Los Carneros Avenue or Cuttings Wharf Road, you'll see us about a third of a mile down. If you continue on out on Highway 121, you'll pass the De Rosa Preserve and Winery Lake Vineyard and a number of other Carneros wineries.
So you could make a day of it. You could make a day of visiting the winery, visiting the preserve by appointment only, and make a whole day just within 3/4 of a mile of here.
You have a marvelous day.
Marvelous
it would
day.
be art-filled,
Right.
it would be wine-filled, it would be fun-filled.
And at the end of the day, you might want to go right behind us. If you look straight behind us to, is it now called Arteza? Arteza, which was built by a Spanish architect?
It used to be Cotonou Napa,
Right,
which
yeah.
is a Spanish sparkling cava producer. And they did that for quite a number of years here in Napa Valley and Carneros. And now they're producing largely table wines, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Cabernet.
So we've almost come full circle with the Spaniards, starting from the Catalonia area, coming here, and Vallejo, etc. And now we have a Spanish architect building behind us, so we've come full circle Spaniard-wise from 16th century to 21st century.
Yes, indeed.
And they love this spot. This is a triangulation here there. We've got we've got Saintsbury, we've got the preserve, we have wineries, we have Spanish bubbly behind us. And tell us about your auction that's coming up this week.
Well, the auction is our one. I like to think it's a fundraiser, but it's
FUN.
FUN, but it is also has a D in fun, and it is Saturday, and I think we have I don't know, maybe 200 people coming. We're hoping that they will find some art that they like, and the art has all been produced by artists that are in the collection, and it's amazing the quality of the work that they have done. It's really surprises me.
You're talking about October 18 of this year, 2003, but our documentary is going to show across the country in the years to come. But every October third week or so, if they're planning ahead, this is when they could look forward to coming here.
Right.
In the shoulder season, when people aren't subjected to too much heat, and they can work themselves together.
Yeah, but unfortunately now there's so many things happening in the Napa Valley that we're competing with visitors that are going here, there, and everywhere, and they are competing with us and we're competing with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What's an ideal 3-day weekend for, if you're saying to somebody that's coming from Maine, they've never been to the Napa Valley, what would you do other than the Carneros? What would you suggest to a couple?
Well, maybe they'd like to go up in a balloon and look down on all of this, and I guess to maybe they'd like to do something old time, like get on the train and go in the train up to
the wine train.
Yeah, the wine train.
Could certainly go to Copia, the Museum of Wine, Food, and the Arts in Napa, in downtown Napa, which is another great art and food and wine combination.
We've, in the documentary, we've done the Napa Valley Museum as well, and we've been up to the Petrified Forest, and we're planning to do First Street, and we're going to do the river, of course, as well. What geologically, what has the river done? It's one of 3 navigable rivers in California, and
well, it's not very navigable. I mean, it's not navigable very far.
No.
It's navigable up to the city of Napa, you know, which is at near the southern end of Napa Valley. But you know what the river has done is drained soil off of the hillsides. Now, Napa Valley is a combination of soils of marine sedimentary origin and of volcanic origin. There was a large amount of volcanic activity in the hills on both sides of Napa Valley. And over the years, you know, the weathering of those rocks have let soil flow down the hillsides onto the valley floor. And so on the valley floor you'd have deep alluvial soils, which, you know, are in the northern half of the valley of mostly volcanic origins. In the southern half of the valley, they are volcanic origin mixed with this marine sedimentary soils, but they tend to be deep and alluvial on the valley floor, and on the hillsides, in the northern part, lighter textured soils, and in the southern part, heavier clay and clay loam soils.
Okay. Rene, if you're talking to a prospective visitor here, how much time would you suggest they want to spend? Because I know when I came it was 3 hours. I wanted to spend 3 hours just looking at art and outside and inside.
We say 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours?
Yeah. And that gives them a taste of, but we've had people come back 4 times to wanting to see everything.
And you've done something special for Napa natives, I think. If they show a Napa native driver's license, do you suspend the fee, the entrance fee, or you did? This was a couple of years ago.
Maybe, I'm not.
Maybe, I'm sure. We'll talk to head office about that.
I don't know.
But it was something that I don't see a lot of museums doing, saying we want to take care of our own people as well as visitors from other parts of the world. We've got 2 minutes left. Let's talk about things. What would you like to say to an American public who is going to, as I said, as diverse as Maine and Florida, that don't know anything about the Napa Valley? What do you want to say, as you first found it when you came up with the Pierce Arrow, what do you want to say to them about the Napa Valley?
Come up and taste the place.
Taste the place.
Taste the place.
Taste the place.
Taste the place. And discover for themselves. I think finding out for yourself about this and that winery and that whatever it is, or taking a hot tub up in Calistoga, maybe it is more fascinating than going on a tour that you're going to get out here and you have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So this is good for newlyweds, it's good for people who have been 50th anniversary, it's good for everybody. Taste the place.
Taste the place.
All right, thanks Rene so much. And Dick, what would you say?
Well, I think we have it all here. We have beautiful countryside, we have world famous wines, we have great art, we have wonderful people, great architecture. So it's a great place to spend a weekend or a week.
And where would they stay?
Well, there's all kinds of bed and breakfast inns. The Carneros Lodge is right down the street here. It's a brand new, wonderful resort that they could try out. And there are all sorts of great hotels, Meadowood Resort, Auberge du Soleil, all up and down the valley. We get something on the order of about 5 million visitors to Napa Valley every year. So there's a lot of people who know about it, but there's a lot of people that still have yet to learn about the treasures in Napa Valley.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you, Dick and Rene. Welcome. This is October 22, 2003. I'm sitting on the shore of the Napa River with Barry Martin, Public Information Officer for the City of Napa. And as I speak, we are aware that Seattle, to the north of us, has had 5 inches of rain, that a third of the state of Washington is under a flood, and behind us we see work that the Napa River, under the Flood Protection Project, is seeking to do away with all this in the future. Barry, lead us into this a little bit when you started being aware of what the city was trying to do.
I think most of us became aware during the coalition process. There had been several attempts at flood control in Napa over many, many years. I think the first congressional action to move toward a flood project on the Napa River probably dates back about 50 years now. Congressional authorization to try something wasn't enough to get something built over those early attempts, and different proposals went to the voters, were rejected for one reason or another. And it wasn't until after the flood of 1986 that the community was again galvanized toward the idea that something had to be done, that for the future of the community, for economic development on top of public safety issues and all the rest, that there had to be a flood protection project on this river.
The phrase 100-year flood comes up because there was a huge flood in 1896, and 90 years to the day we have another flood. People don't realize how active this river was in the 19th century, and if you look behind us, as Barry is doing right now, you'll see where a schooner came in 1844, a Russian schooner, 1844, and this was the only highway into Soskal. Napa City wasn't even planned yet in those days. This was a river of commerce. In 100 years, has the river grown?
Has the river itself grown? Actually, I think probably in the last 100 years, the river has been constrained more than it's grown. What we're seeing happen right now with the processes going on behind us and further south, downriver a mile or two, is a process of undoing what man did for a long period of time. That is to build up the river banks, to constrain the river, to make it more of a channel. And obviously those things were done for the purpose of commerce, largely. They wanted to plant a field and be able to harvest some hay. They wanted to run some cattle and not have them standing up to their necks in water in the springtime. So makeshift levees have been built along this river for decades, probably maybe for 150 years. We don't know when the first truckloads of rocks and dirt and so forth or wagon loads were brought to the riverbank and dumped to try and build up the bank and keep the river in its channel, which is obviously not what a river like this wants to do. It wants to meander and to be wide and to spread out when the heavy waters come, and to then be a trickle during the dry season and so forth. So what we're doing is trying to return the river back to something closer to its natural state.
And as we look behind us, we can see part of this deleveization going on.
Exactly. What was done in the project design was to find a direction in which we could create room for the river, and that direction that was chosen was to the east. We're sitting on the west bank of the river, and all along here from the Napa Mill that we're sitting close to and in part of now, and to our south, are a lot of residences and businesses. When the planners for the project looked at the river, they said, well, if we go to the west, we'll be eliminating a lot of housing, including some historic properties, a lot of affordable housing. On the east bank, there were a lot of former industrial uses that had been abandoned. There was a lot of blighted property. some very ugly scenes over there prior to the demolition that took place, and it was another reason why the city of Napa didn't embrace the river. There was certainly nothing beautiful to look at sitting here looking across. It's not beautiful yet, by the way. It's just lots of dirt over there, but someday it's going to be very attractive. And so the design was done in such a way that the east bank would be cut down and, as you said, de-leveeized. We'll have terracing that will run for a couple of 100 feet back to the east from the existing river channel.
We have a great brochure in front of us in which the marsh plain and floodplain terraces exemplify what you're saying, that we're letting the river seek its own level, would you say?
Essentially, the two levels of terracing are first to accommodate the daily tidal action. As you know, the Napa River is a tidal river from San Francisco Bay to San Pablo Bay. The water comes in on the high tide all the way as far north as Tranca Street. There's a tidal effect. So the limits of this project go to about that point, to Tranca Street. The majority of the tidal effect ends just a little bit north of where we're sitting here in the downtown area, but it can be perceived farther north. So twice a day, the lower level of excavation, which is called the Marsh Plain Terrace, will be inundated by the daily tides. And when that tide goes out, you'll see what looks sort of like a mud flat type area. As time passes, vegetation will naturally develop in those mud flat areas. And I think we're all used to, in living around the San Francisco Bay Area, seeing places where you have, when the tide is out, a very different ecosystem and habitat than when the tide is in. So we'll have that component, and then at a slightly higher elevation, the floodplain terrace is designed to accommodate the actual high water flows in a flood event, and again giving the river room to spread out so that it doesn't back up and spill over its banks in the downtown area above us.
People talk of every major city in the world being founded on a river. I'm thinking immediately of San Antonio, but I'm thinking also that the last people that were there said, well, the river's really just a trickle. It's a paseo effect, but it's just a trickle. Do you anticipate that the river will be significantly changed in a way that we can look at a living, vibrant river that Indians fished in and we fished in years ago?
Well, obviously the goal is to retain or to recreate, hopefully, a living river. A lot of people, I think old-time Napans like to say that, oh, the river's not clean the way it used to be. We used to be able to see the bottom and so on and so forth. There are a lot of reasons for that. The truth is, for the most part, our water and air are cleaner today than they were a couple of generations ago. I love the old story that George Blaufus used to tell, and I'm not sure if you've got him on videotape, about when they built the previous 3rd Street Bridge, as I recall, and they excavated in the river bottom, and the toxic gases that came up out of the soil were so strong that the paint peeled off the buildings nearby. Now, that's an indication that, as in many places, the river was treated as a sewer and a dumping ground. There was no such thing as a regional water quality control board. No one monitored any of that for a long time. There was the feeling just like you couldn't kill all the buffalo, you couldn't pour enough bad stuff in a river to ruin it. But in fact, that took place for generations and generations. A lot of the natural gravel bottom was scooped out of this river, as it has been all over California. And when you take the gravel away, that inhibits the steelhead spawning process. And also the gravel serves to clarify the water. So that's one of the reasons you don't see the bottom. But the actual water quality is not as bad as many people might assume by looking at the color at any given time, or the fact that it's muddy in the wintertime. That's just a natural process. So over time, when we have wetlands and the tidal action, which will also serve to filter the water to some degree, we'll have a cleaner river. It will certainly improve, as another component of modern life is strict controls on what you can wash off, perhaps even to the degree at some point in your driveway. Will you be allowed to, in the future, wash your car in your driveway? That's a question that's actually being considered right now, because what you wash off your car goes down the gutter into the storm drain and eventually makes its way to the river. So that little bit of soap, oil you picked up off the road and so forth, there's a lot of thinking in that area toward complete wastewater, stormwater runoff control in California that will make all of our rivers a lot cleaner in the future. Inconvenient in some ways, but maybe it's what we need to really have a pristine environment again.
I do remember only a couple of years ago seeing a steelhead outside of Celadon restaurant. I was waiting, and it just sat there for at least 20 minutes, and I thought that was in the restaurant. It was rare, but it was good, yeah. And so the river is not as dirty as we think it is somehow.
I think that's true. It's a perception we have by, again, looking at color and saying, well, when I was a kid, if you've been around here for a long time, this and that. We all have that, golden age mentality. Sure. And I can't say quantitatively that I've sampled the water. I'm not a scientist, but our general perception is that the river is dirty when in fact there are a lot of restrictions that weren't there in earlier times to keep it clean. So I think it's probably cleaner today than it was in our parents' generation and theirs.
Barry, how far north are we going with this flood protection? We're looking at a river that goes all the way up to the headwaters of in St. Helena or north of St. Helena. Is the same attention being paid north of us as is being paid here?
The cities of Yountville, or the town of Yountville more specifically, and the city of St. Helena have their own flood control projects underway. They have different issues there than we have here. For example, the city of Calistoga really doesn't have a flooding issue. They're close enough to the source of the water in that portion of the watershed. The kind of flooding that you see in the far upper reaches of the valley is very different than what we see down here. We have the cumulative effect here at the lower end of the valley of all that water from all the creeks coming down and making its way to the bay, so it gets worse as you go south. But St. Helena and Calistoga will deal with St. Helena and Yountville rather will deal with their own individual projects. They're also funded by the Measure A monies. All the communities get Measure A local tax dollars. The Napa City project, as it were, that runs from Tranca Street down to Highway 29 and the Southern Crossing Butler Bridge area is its own project. That's the Napa project.
And the timeline on this, has it been changed by deficits in Washington?
In fact, it has. Right at this moment, we've slipped back about 1 year in the total completion. We're into the year 2007 now for 100% completion of the job, where it had been in 2006. That is largely due to the federal share being inhibited by other priorities in Washington, obviously the homeland security issues and international affairs and so on. The way the project works, we have our local share in Measure A, that's our tax dollars. We have some money from the state of California in what they call subventions fund. There have been some grants and other issues, but the bottom line, the federal government is on the hook for 50% of the cost of this project. Whether they pay that as we go or not remains to be seen. Whether there is an extension of the timing of the project because of getting not as much as we need in a given year, which gradually slows down the project, that's the question that's needing to be answered at this point. So right now we've slipped by 1 full year in the completion of the project, but that again is on the federal funding side. The local share is all there, and more so. The Measure A funding is doing better than it was projected to do, so for the projects that are the local responsibility, we're going full steam ahead.
Weather patterns seem to be changing all over the country, and if I refer to you as Captain Barry instead of Captain Andy, you were at the helm for a long stay during recent floods. Anecdotes that you can recall of what it was like taking your son or your was it son and daughter or both into the studio and just saying, I've got to be here because the radio station is the center, is the helm.
Yeah, my son actually used to, I would take him with me out in the field, and we would go out with our, before cell phones, two-way radios to report on where flooding was happening, and I'd say, come on, we'll go see some cool stuff down here at the creek and so on. So that was often the case over many, many years. The big flood you mentioned from '86 was actually what was determined to be a 50-year flood.
I see.
This project is designed to accommodate the 100-year flood that you mentioned, which is an event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. That's the 100-year flood definition. So that could be this winter, or it could be 99 years from now. What I've seen in my time here in Napa more profoundly is an increase of the problem of creek flooding, specifically on Napa Creek, which is part of this project. It's certainly not the the more glamorous part of the project or the higher profile part, because it's a much smaller component. It affects fewer residences and businesses, but some of those people back in the neighborhoods of Napa Creek have been flooded 5-6 times since 1986, and this river hasn't left its banks more than once, I think, in between those years. So it's been very difficult for those people, a lot of low-income families back in Napa Creek area. So a lot of work will be done back there to improve their lot in the future. And the other issues that I think the valley as a whole have to consider, and I know that the County Board of Supervisors are trying to address, is the watershed as an entity. It all is related. If I go up onto a hillside and I take out natural vegetation and I don't control erosion properly, if I change the amount of water that's running into a creek up on Mount Veeder, it makes its way down into Napa Creek and may flood someone down below. So those decisions have to be carefully made for the future. As we know, there's been a lot of vineyard development, a lot of residential development. There's more paved surface now than there was in 1986. There's more vineyard surface than there was in 86. So those who have the science and the analysis ability to understand those things are helping the decision makers to see what the best policies are for the future.
Unfortunately, there aren't enough police to go around to police these activities, and it seems almost as though some people will violate the laws and pay the fines rather than stop what they wanted to do in the first place. So it all comes back to personal responsibility, and that's very, very hard to judge. Barry, are there checks and balances? I'm looking at here the Napa River Dry Bypass. Is that a check and balance within the city that a lot of people may not know outside the city and in the city what it is?
Yeah, the bypass is a fascinating component of the project, and in many ways may be the key to keeping the downtown from flooding. The Napa River has an oxbow in it where the river bends back on itself. It's flowing mostly due south, makes a sweeping turn back upon itself and flows to the east, northeast for a little ways, and then it turns again and flows back to the south and turns again. There's a point at which you can connect the oxbow. The sort of shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line concept, and that's what was done here. Some of the history, I think, shows that the locals knew that water would run across the land out of the river channel in various places in the past, and they tried to accommodate that. One of those areas is over at the Napa Expo, what's been the fairgrounds since about 1890, and I believe in large part that was left undeveloped. No one built homes and other things on those properties because they knew there'd be water over there a lot of the time. So the Oxbow bypass channel is an attempt to give the river a sort of safety valve, a place where it can leave its banks, and then by channeling the water back into the natural river channel just a bit downstream, you avoid flooding the Oxbow area and actually the downtown at the same time. Because once the water leaves the banks where it makes that big turn, it tends to run all over into the downtown, down Soskell Avenue, and once it's there, it goes where it will, seeks its own level. The biggest issues about the bypass channel right now are how it's designed in such a way that it becomes attractive public space. That's really the key. If you try to take the bypass channel out of the flood project design, you don't have a functional flood project anymore. You don't have 100-year flood protection. We can't fool ourselves. This is an integrated system that involves the terracing we talked about, replacement of bridges to increase the freeboard carrying capacity of the river. It also includes flood walls and levees in some places, and the bypass channel is a key component. So we have to take that space and turn it into something that will be functional, attractive, and useful for the community for the vast majority of time that it's dry. I think the calculations are that in any given time frame, that bypass channel might go into use to carry floodwaters 1 day out of a year, 1 day out of every other year. So you can see it's there, again, as a safety valve, just like we have life insurance policies and fire extinguishers and everything else. So we have to make sure during those other days, the vast majority of the time, that people will be using it in a park-like way as a natural community gathering point that will be both useful and attractive to look at, because we have to keep in mind that our bridges, a couple of our bridges, will be looking down into this bypass channel. And also across from the bridges to the Oxbow Preserve that's been set aside, and over to Copia, and we'll have views from these new higher bridges that don't exist now. So we have to make sure that what we're looking at is nice and attractive, and I think a lot of people's time, especially the technical advisory panel for the flood project and people in the economic development and redevelopment agency at the city, are looking very carefully at all the components. What kind of materials do you use in this bypass channel? What are the colors? What are the aesthetic aspects? How do you access it? What might we do in it? Keeping in mind that if a flood does threaten, you have to be able to move anything that might impede the water out of there. You have to make sure that nothing is in there that's so valuable that it can't get wet and muddy, because that's what it's there for at the bottom line.
And all this, Barry, is going on as we're redeveloping highways, from Highway 29 to Trancas to bridges, replacing First Street Bridge and Third Street Bridge. So we're changing highway structure as we are the river at the same time.
Right. The First Street Bridge, the Soskell Bridge, the Third Street Bridge, and the Maxwell Bridge are all part of the flood project. They've all been designed to be replaced, again, to increase capacity, to make a higher, longer, wider bridge structure that can carry more water underneath it. What we've seen in the past, the Third Street Bridge was notorious in the downtown area for becoming a dam during a flood. As the water reached a certain level, and eventually debris would collect along the base of the bridge, and that just pushed the water, slowed the water down, and it backed up and came out of channel somewhere else. Down south of where we're sitting here at Imola Avenue, or State Route 121, the Maxwell Bridge, which was built in the 30s, is very similar. There's a bottlenecking effect in the river. If you take the boat trip down, you'll see where the river gets narrow. The engineers didn't want to make the bridge any longer than they had to make it, so they increased the embankments, pushed the dirt closer to the river channel again, and essentially created a partial dam down there. The design of the structures of the bridge caused the water to divert in toward the bank on the west side, and cause some scouring and some loss of bank over the years down there. So everything we do affects something else, and the new bridge at Maxwell is 1,500 to 1,700 feet in length. There'll be wide flood terraces underneath it, so it will no longer be this partial dam that it's been in the past.
Oh, wonderful. To all of you viewers, realizing that Napa Valley is the paradise that we all know, what Barry has tried to explain to us is how we've gotten rid of a Achilles heel, and if we take the Achilles heel out of the Napa Valley, we're going to have a healthy environment for the next 100 years. Barry, thank you so much for doing the show. We're here at Copia. In our background, we're the furthest extremity on First Street. And again, I'm with Ed Henderson, the mayor of Napa, who is celebrating his 50th year in Napa. 50 years.
I'm 50 years.
50 years.
Yes, I'm 50.
You don't look it.
Yeah,
don't
no,
look it, but,
I've aged quickly in 50 years.
All right.
But I feel good. Yeah.
What I'd like to ask you, Ed, is what First Street means to you, what you've seen develop in the last 50 years that comes to mind.
Well, a great deal. But first of all, you know, I've always considered First Street as a street of commerce for the city of Napa. We've got Copia, and we go down to the other end, and we have Embassy Suites and the hotels, and in between we've got the downtown business. And it's so interesting to me that when it was laid out, this city 150 some years ago, we were a port city, and people could just walk over from getting off the docks, and then they'd come over to the city, to the downtown. And we've maintained that for 150 some years through all kinds of changes, through all kinds of world conflicts and this type of thing. The First Street has maintained that the heart of the business area of the city of Napa. So that's what it means to me. And I think it's even more so today than it's ever been in even the history of Napa. They say that there's more things happening in the last 6 years in the city of Napa than have happened in the entire 150 plus years of the past. And if that's true, I think that the main thrust has been right here on First Street. So that's how important it is to us. And you know, we have the City Hall and we can walk down. I enjoy as mayor walking downtown and visiting with the shop owners and the people, and I'll go over in Chamber of Commerce and visit, and every once in a while they'll come to see me, and it's great because we're within walking distance, almost shouting distance. In fact, we are sometimes.
There's a little bit of Mayberry downtown.
Yes,
in fact,
we want to maintain that.
You know everybody by their first name.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Sunny side of the street, not so sunny side.
Where you go across the street. Yeah.
Tell us about the flood project right now, just as an intervening part of First Street.
You know, I've been here a long time, as you said, 50 years, a half of a century. Our town was almost gone because of the floods. We were flooding sometimes our downtown twice a year, and the shopkeepers were just moving out. But the flood control project that was passed by the voters, the 2/3 vote of the voters, the entire county, made such a difference because people immediately started investing in our downtown. So I think the flood control has just brought us back to life.
In other words, commerce on First Street could prosper knowing that the river was not going to be
They were
damaged
confident.
much more.
It was a confidence, that's right. It's a matter of
reinvestment took over.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time, yeah.
Now, we're looking at a mile and a half, just a mile and a half from here to the outlets, and half of that is residential, and that's where the old commercial merchants made their homes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The captains and the crew, and they would get off the boat, and then they just walk downtown, and whatever they did downtown in those days. I wasn't around then.
No. I
really,
thought you were a
Tony.
sea captain, actually.
You see, I'm only 50.
Captain Andy, or Captain Ed. You remember Showboat?
Captain Ed, yes.
We are going across the country with this program, and just a few words to people in the East Coast or people up north, Maine, from Maine to Florida. We're going to send this program, this 3-hour documentary, across the country. And have you got any little welcome for all those people why they should come to Napa?
Of course, I welcome them, and I hope they'll come and see our wonderful wine country. I hope they'll come downtown to visit our beautiful restaurants, but most of all, even if you don't come downtown, or even if you don't come, buy some of our product, try some of our wines. It's a wonderful thing, and we need the revenue to take care of our streets and sidewalks, folks.
I'm thinking of Forrest Gump. Do you think if you put a little seat outside the city hall that you could have a replica of you and they could sit down with you there?
We could,
Would
yeah.
you work on
Yeah,
that?
I've seen that in different places, yeah.
All right.
Maybe a box of chocolates or something.
Box of chocolates,
yeah,
great
that
idea.
would be great, I would think.
So when you come to Napa next time, go to City Hall, find Ed, and just say, would you come out and sit with me for a minute or two? He's always there.
That's right.
He's
Just
always there.
ask for Ed.
Ask for Ed. And I'm sitting with Dan Menez, Napa's police chief, and we're in a very convenient location here. What would you say are your best memories of First Street?
Well, First Street is really an interesting component of Napa and the downtown because it serves a lot of purposes. It is a major thoroughfare. It is one of our east-west arterial streets. It carries a lot of traffic in and out of the city, so that's important. It is a thoroughfare. It's also the heart of commerce in the downtown area. The part that I like the most is also the heart of a lot of our community activities. First Street is closed probably, I don't know how many days of the year, but quite often for various things, such as our very famous wine arts and craft festival that is one of the most highly attended in the nation. Thousands of people come down to visit booths, etc. We close off the street. 4th of July celebration, the Chef's Market program where we have lots of fun things for people to do, the Christmas parade, the holiday. I mean, it seems like all of the civic activities tend to take place on First Street or around First Street, so it becomes a real social gathering point as well as an area for commerce and then transportation.
Dan, speaking of farmers markets, if visitors are coming here, they should know that between May and September, where we're looking right now, every Friday night is
Chef's Market, and the street is closed off. It becomes a pedestrian mall. There is plenty of parking within a block of the street, so that's not a problem. And just wonderful things. All of the shops are open, the restaurants are open, there are booths to sell items, there are farmers with products. It's not just produce, it's all kinds of things. There's entertainment. The area that we're across from right now is one of the landmarks for downtown, and there used to be a big clock tower here that was just recently torn down, kind of a 70s looking thing that would be
on our immediate right.
Immediate right, and it was sort of it was a very controversial item in our town because it looks so 70-ish. So it was ultimately torn down, and there's a fountain. But we have, for instance, in this spot during Chef's Market, a little band plays, and tables and chairs are put out for people to sit and enjoy music and have a beverage and some Napa Valley wine and just have a great time.
And right as we look to our right, we have Dwight Murray Plaza.
That is the plaza where the clock tower formerly stood.
Named after a famous doctor here that people loved him so much they named a part of the area after him.
That's right. And across the street is a beautiful mural that depicts the history of the Napa Valley, particularly with our Mexican influence and over the century that we've been here, a little over a century. So that's really nice for people to sort of get an idea of what where we came from. Yeah.
This is the Hispanic Heritage mural, which the Chamber of Commerce got started, and it takes us all the way back 500 years, back to Indians in the valley.
Actually, it does. Yeah, there are some Native American pictures on there. General Vallejo, who at one time owned the entire area. It was one of his ranchos that he deeded off to various folks. Cayetano Juarez, other people that were famous leaders of ancient Napa history, and a lot of our more current leaders of Napa's history, people like Hope Lugo and Tala de Winter and people like that. So yeah, it's a nice remembrance of kind of where we came from.
We have restaurants all over the place right here. We have stores to the right, as you're saying. And if we go down a little further, we'll see architectural styles that go back to the turn of the century.
Well, that's true. Yeah, this part of First Street has an interesting mix of architecture. If you like a very eclectic approach, there are some very 50s looking buildings, almost Art Deco style. There are some 60s and 70s looking fronts. But there are also many of the older buildings have been restored. Some are waiting to be restored. One of the Art Deco buildings that's on the street is the old Merrill's Drugstore that's all tile front.
Yep.
And one of, I think, only 2 left in the city that have that facade. So there is a nice mix of history and architecture and design for people to see when they come downtown.
And the Napa Register is Napa Register Building 1905 is just a few steps down here.
Right, and across the street from that is another large building that is the Native Sons Hall, and the bottom is retail, but the upper stories still are reflective of that Victorian style of architecture.
And next door to that is the Goodman Library, which has seen 1 century of use as a library and as a museum.
That's true. It's still a library and a museum run by the Napa County Historical Society, and a great place to go visit.
What we're seeing here is that there's one building after another, and if you're walking the city as opposed to driving, and of course there's great parking all the way around, free parking, if you're walking the city, you just come across one new admirable site after another.
Oh, that's true, and I always tell people when friends come to walk in the downtown area or anywhere in Napa is make sure you look up, because what may be on the bottom floor may look very modern and contemporary, but if you look up to the next story, you'll often see the old architecture, the old icons of either the 1800s or the early 1900s, and that's always fun to look at.
The Native Sons building has a gangway across to the Goodman building.
That's true,
which is worth having a look at. Dan, if visitors from across the country, I know you have a daughter at school in Fordham right now, visitors from elsewhere in the country come to Napa, give us 3 things you'd like them to see on First Street that you would speculate and say these 3 things.
Well, definitely the architecture. I mean, that's just it. I mean, most people have some interest in seeing that because it covers so many different eras. I think that's the main thing. I think definitely the Goodman Library is an interesting place to go. And thirdly, any of the great restaurants. I mean, we've got some. I mean, obviously, looking at me, you know, I like to eat, and I mean, there are some wonderful places to eat.
Let's go.